Thanks so much, Peter. And thanks for having me here, everyone. It's just an honor to be in this group today. I moved to Connecticut about a year ago to help launch Amirah's expansion into the state of Connecticut. Peter gave a great introduction. We are an anti-trafficking organization based in Boston, Massachusetts, focusing in education outreach and then primarily in aftercare, or providing a safe home or a safe space as we work with federal and local law enforcement for women to have an opportunity to escape a life of exploitation and enter into a life of freedom, restoration, and hope. And so I moved here for that purpose. As was mentioned, I was a pastor at FaithBridge, where I helped to launch a ministry for them, and then was a pastor with in the Passion Movement, which is based in Atlanta, Georgia, with Pastor Louis Giglio. And then my mentor and close friend, Ben Stewart, went to plant a church there in Washington, D.C., and I got to spend a couple years helping him launch that church. But all the while, my passion was in this field of human trafficking. And I was a volunteer at Amirah when I was a seminary student at Gordon Conwell, apparently the home of the 13th man. But as I was moving from Boston, Massachusetts to Washington, D.C., I was driving through Connecticut and my very old car broke down. And I pushed it into a junkyard, and she lives somewhere in the state of Connecticut as we speak. And so prior to moving to Connecticut, that was my only experience in Connecticut. But this time around, it's been a lot more pleasant. And I'm excited to tell you guys about all that God is doing here. So I'm excited to join this group too. I got to Connecticut about a year ago, as I mentioned, and I heard whisperings of the new Canaan Society from different people, different places, and it was sort of veiled in a shroud of mystery, and it kind of sounded like the Illuminati to me. I wasn't sure what I was getting into, but then had an opportunity to meet Dave and then talk to Paul and look you guys up on your website. And man, I am just so amazed by this group and all that you're doing to connect men to the heart of God and to commission them to be missionaries in the workforce. And I just could not be more honored to be a part of this group this morning. So with that, let me tell you a little bit about what we're up to. And I want to start with a story that's going to sound entirely disconnected, but because I have pastoral roots, I tell stories and use illustrations. So that's just who I am. But when I was in college, I had a friend named Tanner Coleman, who we called Schwackums, and I'm not entirely sure why, but he was sort of the fun man in our group. He got us into mountain biking, cliff jumping. He'd take us on sort of wild adventures through campus on the weekends. But as is true of many people in that personality, he was also a bit of a mess. And so he was the kind of guy, I shared a room with him, that would leave plates of molding food in his bed. Like he would just finish his dish and leave it there till, the Lord returns. He grew out his hair so that he could have dreadlocks, but decided at the last minute that he would instead change his mind to have the world's tallest mohawk. He would misplace money. He would just be like, where did I put that? Thousands of dollars. He was just a mess of a human being. And then one day, our junior year, everything suddenly started to change. And it was perceptible. You could tell something was happening with Tanner. He started dressing a little bit nicer. He started showering on a regular basis. I remember walking into the kitchen one morning, and I walked into the refrigerator, and he's seated at our kitchen table with his back to the wall and his laptop in front of him, and he was concentrating, which was concerning. And so I'm in the refrigerator, and I'm like, Tanner, what are you doing, man? And he said, I'm budgeting. And I said, you're what? And he said, I'm working on my finances. And I said, oh, this is serious. So we need to call a roommate meeting. Something is happening. And we were like, what's going on, man? Tell us what's going on in your life. Are you on drugs? Like, what's happening? Everything has changed. And he said, basically, at the end of the day, we got the story out of him that this past summer, before our junior year, he had gone to be a Christian counselor at a camp called Pine Cove out in East Texas. And it was a Christian camp to tell high school students about Jesus. And he was there. And while he was doing that, he met a girl named Katie, a sweet girl from Alabama. And he fell hard for her. And so he wanted to be near her. So he started showering a little bit more. And he wanted to be attractive to her. So he started wearing a little bit nicer clothing. He wanted to be able to take her on dates. And so he started working out how to not lose all of his money. And that love within his heart changed a lot of things about him. And they got married while we were in college. And that was both exciting and difficult because it meant that we sort of lost our fun man. And so shortly after he got married, we decided we were going to have a roommate trip, just the guys. You guys went on your honeymoon, you're married, that's great, we're cheering you on, but let's get the crew back together. And so we decided we were going to go camping, sleep out in the wild under the stars, go mountain biking, cliff jumping, just like the old days. And I remember we got to the point where we had finished mountain biking, covered in mud and sweat and blood. And the way that we always sort of showered off or cleaned off was we went cliff jumping. We would jump, into the water. That was sort of how we did that. And there were two ways to enter the water. One was to throw yourself careening off of a 30-foot cliff in search of glory and the thrill of it all. Or you could take this natural little stairway down to the edge of the water that we had seen children and small dogs use. And so we get to that point where it's time to jump in, and Tanner starts going down the little stairway with the Shih Tzus. And I was like, Tanner, what are you doing? And he kind of mumbled something under his breath. And I said, what? And he said, Katie said I can't jump. And I said, what? And he said, Katie said I can't jump. And I had a moment there. You have to remember, I had lost my best friend physically. He wasn't living with me anymore. Emotionally, I felt like I lost the man that I knew. And I had a moment. And so I kind of freaked out, and I was like, get out of there, man. She's changing you. That's not right. Everything's wrong. And kind of had this moment. And so he sort of just sighed deeply, climbed up out of the water, put his arm around me, and we walked to the edge of the cliff, and we sat down. And just looking out over the water, he told me this story about Katie's uncle. His wife's uncle had broken his back and was paralyzed from the waist down from cliff jumping. And I felt in that moment like the idiot that I was. And but then I'll never forget this. He was looking out over the water, and then he took his eyes off the water and he looked straight at me, and he said, and Mike, I love to sacrifice for my wife. I delight to sacrifice for her. And I remember thinking in that moment, I've never loved anybody that much. And I've never known love like that. And I learned something in that moment, and that is that true love delights to sacrifice for the beloved. True love delights to sacrifice for the beloved. How can I show my love? By laying my life down for you, to show the value that you have in my eyes. And that to me is the most perfect picture of Jesus. That when Jesus showed up on the scene, people were taken immediately by his authority. If you read the book of Mark, the word authority is the word that comes up the most often in the first 8 chapters. That when he spoke as one with authority. Who talks like that? When he walked in and he saw people who were sick, he would say, you're not sick anymore. And he had authority over the physical world. When he walked into a room and somebody was plagued by spiritual darkness or demonic activity, he would cast that out. And they would say, who has power like this? He would be asleep in a boat as the wind and the waves raged around them, and stand up and say, peace, be still. And people were taken by his authority over nature. And so the religious leaders of that day recognized that, and they expected in him somebody who would be a conquering hero, a conquering king, ride in and take over. And yet Jesus, when Peter, his disciple, expressed that same sort of mentality, hey, the Messiahs don't lay their lives down, the Messiahs take over. He said, get behind me, Satan. He said, I came not to take anything, but to give everything. I came to lay my life down for the beloved. And that's so much of my story of understanding this incredible love, for God so loved the world that he gave his son, that he might lay his life down for us. And so the love of God for the people of this world caused him to sacrifice everything, to give himself fully. And then Jesus would look at his disciples and he would say, love one another in the same way that I have loved you. Love one another in the same way that I have loved you. And in the very next verse, in John 15:13, he says, greater love has no man than this, then you should lay your life down for your friends. Greater love has no man than this, then you should lay your life down for your friends. And that's Amirah, the organization that I work for. That's our theme verse. Greater love has no one than this, then you should lay your life down for your friends. And so to back up just a little bit, I first heard about the reality of human trafficking when I was in college. And it was a part of a ministry called Breakaway. It's the largest college ministry in the nation. And they did an amazing job of presenting to us the realities of human trafficking. And they focused on an organization that was based, interestingly enough, in India. As was mentioned that I think we said Bill was heavily involved with. And it was an organization in India, and it was called As Our Own. And it combated modern day slavery that was happening overseas. And for me, this organization did a remarkable job of communicating what's actually happening in the world of human trafficking and in God's heart to move towards the lost, the broken, and the hurting. And so I wanted to be involved with it. But for me, at that time in my life, it was a devastating reality, but it was distant. It was something that was happening over there. And then I moved to Houston, where I started work at Faith Bridge Church, as you saw. And I was house sitting for some friends, just staying at their place, taking care of their dogs over the weekend. And they had left the TV on. And what came on the 9 o'clock news was on ABC, this documentary about modern day slavery, human trafficking happening in Houston, Texas. And for me as a Christian, as somebody that understands that God came to lay himself down for me, and therefore my response is to lay myself down for the world, to love the world that much, I thought, well, that's something that I need to be a part of. And so, kind of a long story, I won't go into all of it, but tracked it down and ended up volunteering with this organization called Redeemed Ministries. And Redeemed Ministries partnered with the Houston Police Department and local churches to help rescue women. And so what they would do is they would send out 3 teams of 5 to 6, half men, half women, and we would go to the same 6 brothels every other Saturday, places that were fronts for human trafficking, places like massage parlors, nail salons. And the men would sit in the car and we were security, though if something ever went down, I have no idea what they expected me to do, but I was there. And we would take license plate numbers of men walking in and out, and we would take profiles, and we would take license plate numbers and we'd send that to the police every Saturday. And the women would go inside and get to know the girls that were inside early in the morning when there weren't pimps and traffickers around. And if a woman inside ever identified herself as a minor or verbalized that she was there against her will, we would dial a personal number and a police officer would come and extract her from that environment. And 2 things were important about that season of life. And the first was we would go early in the morning where there weren't usually buyers present. There weren't usually pimps, there weren't usually traffickers. But every so often a man would walk in. And I knew from the time that I spent in college learning about this issue that the average age of a first-time trafficking victim in the world and in the US is 13 to 14 years old. I knew that they usually come from, to use the Department of Homeland Security's language, intolerable home life situations. Running away, 70% of first-time trafficking incidents where a girl is trafficked happens at truck stops, where a young girl who's fleeing an intolerable home life situation is preyed upon by a predatory pimp or trafficker. I knew that. I knew that there are an average 500,000 women being trafficked in the United States. And I knew that they were forced to perform 7 to 12 sex acts per day against their will in the worst conditions that a human being could imagine. And I knew that's what was happening inside. And so I'll never forget the first time I watched a man walk in, knowing what he was there for and knowing who was inside waiting for him. And I remember everything about that moment. I remember the way his hair was combed. I remember the color of the sky that day. And I remember thinking in that moment, if that was my daughter or if that was my sister inside, I wouldn't be waiting for the police. If that was my daughter or if that was my sister, there is nothing that I wouldn't do to make sure that she was safe from harm. Nothing. There's no legislation I wouldn't seek to change. There's no wall I wouldn't tear down. There's no home I wouldn't build. There is nothing that I wouldn't do to make sure that she was free and safe. And I felt the Lord speak to me in that moment. not audibly and in not an overly spiritualized moment, but perceptibly, that is your daughter and that is your sister. Your story is now wrapped up with theirs. And I felt this great sense of Christian responsibility that this is our story, that the story of Jesus is that he came to lay his life down for us. So we ought to lay our lives down for the vulnerable. And so I was increasingly more involved. So I was a pastor, but I went to seminary. And when I went to seminary, I heard that there was this amazing safe home called Amirah. And that was important because somewhere along the lines, as I was receiving training for this ministry, a high-ranking police officer in the Houston Police Department was explaining what we were going to do. And long before I ever went out and experienced the world of anti-trafficking, in the process of training, he's explaining that we're going to go to these same 6 places every other Saturday and all the details that I just gave you. And somewhere along the way, as he's explaining this to me, it dawned on me, not only does the police department know that this is happening, they actually know exactly where they are. They know where to find them. And that to me was unfathomable. How is it that you can know where these girls are and not be doing something about it? Why are you waiting on me and Luann from my church when you're the one with the authority to go in and do something? So I raised my hand full of righteous indignation and sort of told him what he needed to be doing. And he said, okay, imagine we go in and we conduct a sting and we pull out 6 women. He said, if we haven't waited and done our homework and we can't prove that they were there against their will, then now we have to arrest them for prostitution. And we've just turned a victim into a criminal, and we've made their lives infinitely more difficult. He said, but imagine we conduct a sting, we pull out 6 women. Best case scenario, we can prove that they were there against their will. He said, what happens to these girls next? He said, we can give them a place to sleep for a night or 2 at the local precinct, but that's not always safe. But then we turn them loose. If they've been trafficked from overseas, they don't speak the language. If they've been trafficked from within the United States, there's still this unbelievable amount of psychological manipulation, physical force. And then it's not uncommon to find 2 to 3 times the amount of narcotics in their system than you would find in somebody who would use recreationally. So he said within 24 to 48 hours, they will be in need of their fix so badly that they will wander back to the hands of their abuser. And that sort of took the air out of the room. So you're saying that 99 times out of 100, if you pull a woman out, she goes back. Yeah, that's basically what I'm saying. And so someone else in the room asked, well, then where is there hope? Why are we here doing this at all? And he said, there is hope, and it's in safe homes. He said, we would pull out as many women as there were beds in safe homes where we could give them a sense of safety and home and anonymity from their trafficker, where they could be given tools and resources to have a new life, where they could be showered with real love, where they could have a real opportunity. He said, there are currently, to my knowledge, only 11 beds in all of Houston. Houston is the nation's 4th largest city, with thousands of women being trafficked. There are only 11 beds. So this is a massive problem. I studied entrepreneurship, business management and entrepreneurship in college. And I have this entrepreneurial brain and this sort of passionate, like movement oriented kind of personality. And so my thought was, if we need beds, let's make homes. And so when I got to seminary and I heard that there was this amazing safe home called Amirah, I got involved. I just sort of took inventory of my life, and I was like, if this is the solution and they're doing it, then I want to be a part of it. And I just sort of took inventory of my own life, and I said, I got a little bit of time and a little bit of money. And so I became a monthly donor, and I started volunteering actually in the home. And I got to watch as these women would come in off the streets totally broken, and I would watch as they were transformed. And so Amirah, that name Amirah means princess or daughter of the king. And the idea is that each woman that comes to us would go from seeing herself as victim or slave to beloved daughter of King Jesus forever. And you would watch as they would come in with low self-esteem, unable to make eye contact, beaten up by life in the worst possible ways. And you would watch as they would leave sort of heads held high, reconciled to a child if they had one, reconciled to their family, with jobs and a new future. And it was the best thing I've ever done. And it was remarkable. And so then, as I mentioned, I got to go spend a couple of years helping my mentor and close friend plant Passion City Church in Washington, D.C., all the while, though, knowing that this is what the Lord was going to call me back to. And so 2 years into that, Amirah called and said, hey, we're going to launch the very first long-term safe home in the state of Connecticut. And we need somebody to come be the entrepreneurial force behind that. And for me, that was something that I couldn't turn down because I had this passion and desire to be a part of the anti-trafficking movement, but I don't have a master's in social work. I don't have a degree in criminal justice. So in many ways, I'm not qualified. But they said, we just need a starter and we need a pastor, somebody who has launched things and somebody who understands God's heart for this issue that can connect with the people of God and can connect with law enforcement and can help us get this thing off the ground. And so that's what I've been doing. And so Amirah in Boston was launched in 2009. Last year in 2019, we celebrated, I think it was 3,000 nights of freedom. We saw 5 survivors either employed or enrolled in classes. We trained over 300 law enforcement and healthcare professionals in how to identify and aid trafficking victims. And we're getting to bring that to the state of Connecticut. One of my favorite stories, and I'll close with this and then we'll open it up to questions. But I am in that season of life right now where you saw I'm engaged to a wonderful woman named Tate Sieber, who you could have substituted her into that first video. And that really could have been our weekly interaction. I mean, she's literally in the middle of a week-long media fast right now that has not lasted more than an hour per day. But I'm engaged with her, and I'm in that stage of life where all of my friends are getting married. I mean, just one by one, all of my friends are dropping like flies, and they are all getting married. And I'm left asking the question, how did they pull that off, right? Because like I knew these guys in college, and in particular, my youngest brother John recently got engaged, and it wasn't that long ago. It was just a few years ago. I remember it well when my mom walked into the backyard and he was sitting in the mud eating rocks, literally chewing on hard rocks. And she asked, "What are you doing?" And he said, "So I can have hard muscles." That guy just convinced a wonderful, beautiful, capable woman to spend the rest of her life with him. How did they pull that off? How did he pull that off? I think it was 2 things for all these guys. They showed character, that they were around. They were men of integrity. And then the second thing is they showed an initiation, that they moved towards these women. And they showed a receptiveness to be with them in their best moments and in their worst moments. And so the question that I want to leave us thinking about is, how do you convince somebody like Maureen, who had been trafficked from the time that she was 13 years old, in the worst possible conditions that a human being can imagine, how do you convince somebody like that that there's a God in heaven who loves her? Somebody who's been enslaved and raped and a part of the worst possible scenario that a human being can imagine, who was trafficked from the time she was a preteen, turned 18, and was arrested for prostitution and spent some time in prison. When you meet somebody like Maureen, how do you convince her that there's a God in heaven who loves her? I think it's the same thing. I think it's an initiation and a responsiveness, that you move towards them in love and you show them that there is a God in heaven and he does love you. And so when we met Maureen, she was in prison. She had been arrested for prostitution, even though it was never her choice. And she was due up to be released in just a few months. And she started expressing to us that her worst fear was that when the prison doors swung open, that it wouldn't be to freedom, that she would see her trafficker's face. And she indeed did start hearing from him. Don't think that when those prison doors swing open, you're free. It's not uncommon that women will have their trafficker's name tattooed on them to remind them that they're property, or dollar signs tattooed on them to remind them that they're just a way of making money. And so she was terrified that she would be released from prison into an even worse state of enslavement. And yet, because we had moved towards her and met her through our outreach program, instead of her face, she saw the bright, shining, hope-filled faces of Amirah's staff to welcome her into our home. And it wasn't long into our program where she expressed that she had had a little girl somewhere along the way, and she wanted to see her. And so we arranged this meeting in a church sanctuary where our CEO tells the story of the two of them running across the room, tears streaming down their face and embracing. And she dedicated her recovery to her daughter. And for her, it was just been amazing to watch. But it wasn't long for her before all these sort of horizontal reconciliations turned vertical, and the love of others turned her face heavenward to see the love of another, to see the love of God. And she was baptized in a beach in the North Shore of Boston, Massachusetts, and came to know the love of Jesus. And it's just amazing to watch. I mentioned that I was a volunteer, and every night after dinner, the women go through this ritual where they light a candle and they pray this prayer, and they say, "Dear Lord, may we remember the women who are still out there. May they find hope and courage in this light to one day join us at our table." And to me, that's such a perfect picture of the gospel, that we were all lost and without hope, and Jesus, at great cost to himself, moved in to lay his life down for us, that he might rescue us, to give us a new name, a new life, a new story, and that we might light up a candle, light a light, so that others might see that and come to know him, to have rescue, to have safety, and to have love. And so that's a little bit of what we're doing, and we are launching pretty soon. So we've raised all the funds to launch the home, at least the first year's operating cost in the state of Connecticut. We're in the hiring process now, and the doors will be open in early 2021. And so we're pretty thrilled about all that God's done and all that he continues to do. We're still looking for more church partners and different partnerships, but we're grateful for the place that we're in now. And we just believe that with the launch of this first home, this is just the first of many, that we won't just be 2 homes, but we'll be eventually 200, that it won't just be a couple of homes, but it'll be a network where more women can find more hope. So that's a little bit of our story. So I know human trafficking is a heavy way to start your morning. So I am grateful for the opportunity to just get to tell their story. I'm honored to get to represent these women in this way. And I'm grateful that you would lend your ear and undergo a little bit of discomfort to hear about this horrible reality. But I hope that you feel a tremendous amount of hope, that there are organizations like Amirah that are shining a bright light into this darkness, and that the tale is starting to turn, that the landscape is starting to change, and there's going to be more hope into the future because of the work that we're doing. So that's a little bit of who we are. I'll open it up now to question and answer.
Thank you, Mike. Dave, take it over.
Thank you so much, Michael. We so appreciate you being with us this morning, and I hope this is not the only time we have you on these calls. It's a delight for us to be able to embrace you and include you in our fellowship, and you are a welcome member any and every time. I would like to. You gave us a good background of your past, and I'm glad you finally brought Tate into this, or I was going to. Mike's off the market for you guys, just in case you have sisters or whatever. Just so you know, he's going down the path, and he needs the brothers around him. So we got to be there to support this brother. But I would like to know more about the organization itself. If you could give us an idea of where is sex slavery and the industry in Connecticut? Mm-hmm. How are these girls getting into this around us in our own state? And if you could go into a little more detail on what it is that Amirah does to help them transition from where they are to a better place.
Yeah, that's a great question. So yeah, we did. So Amirah is based in Boston, Massachusetts, and it was kind of the church or the people of God at their best. And they said, well, if you need a safe home, we'll build one. And so that was 2009. 2018, we were recognized by the United Nations and invited to be a part of some conversations on best practices. And so it's been an incredibly successful organization. Peter DiMarzio of Homeland Security sits on our special advisory board. So we maintain a strong working relationship with federal and local law enforcement. And they've been urging us to sort of duplicate or replicate our model. And so we landed on Connecticut, to back into your question, because Connecticut is a hotbed for this issue. So Dave actually gave me a book, which I'm grateful for, called The Berlin Turnpike, A True Story of Human Trafficking in America. And it's meant to be sort of paradigmatic, or just sort of, an example or indicative of trafficking in America. And it's fascinating to me that they chose Connecticut to be that place, because Connecticut, it's a major issue here. We work with the Department of Children and Families. There have been multiple confirmed cases of child sex trafficking, and that doesn't even include the adults, but there have been multiple confirmed cases of child sex trafficking in every single county in the state of Connecticut. So this is not an isolated thing. This isn't just happening in our poorer communities. It's literally happening everywhere in every county. And so, Amirah is launching a home in the greater Hartford area for women in the state of Connecticut. So it doesn't matter really where they've been trafficked. If they've been trafficked in Connecticut, they can come to us, and we will be launching the first long-term. It's pretty exciting because since we got here, there's actually another organization that's going to be launching another long-term safe home in the state of Connecticut. They're partners with one of our partners, and so they've been asking us questions, and we've been giving them, sharing our experience, and they're going to probably be launching around the same time we are. So Connecticut is about to go from 0 to 2 long-term homes, although we need more like 200. So, but we're grateful for PET down in Bridgeport, and we'll be in the greater Hartford area. And what we do is it's a trauma-informed aftercare. So we say we treat 6 aspects of whole person care. So mental, physical, emotional, spiritual, social, and then vocational. So the 3 phases of our program are first just trauma care. So when a woman comes to us, even though she's now in a safe place and she's not in any danger, it's like when you pull a pot of boiling water off the burner, it doesn't immediately go to calm. It's still chaos. And that first maybe 6 months or so is just letting the women kind of settle. And that's all focused on trauma care. And then the next phase is vocational training. And so we don't count a woman's time with us a success unless she has secured a job or gone back and completed a degree. One of our partners is UPS, and they pay up to $25,000 per woman to go back and get a college education. And they know our story. They know they make special provisions to help these women. So, and then the last phase is just a transition to independence. So we sort of view our logo as the butterfly, as you saw. We sort of view Amirah as the cocoon, the safe place where she can transform and become all that she was meant to be. But if she doesn't transition to a healthy state of independence, then we haven't really done our job. So that's the last phase. So that's more about the organization itself and why we chose Connecticut. So to answer another part of your question, which was how do they end up in trafficking? That kind of goes back to, I think it's 70% of first-time trafficking incidents, according to Homeland Security, take place at truck stops where girls are fleeing intolerable home life situations. That's a little bit of an older study. It's a little bit of an older statistic. It has changed some since then because of the use of the internet. It is still primarily girls from impoverished communities. The vast majority of these girls come from homes that were abusive or traumatic in some way. And the vast majority of girls who are trafficked are actually from girls who are trafficked in New England. The vast majority of them are from New England. And really what you need for trafficking to exist is wealth and poverty. It's a supply and demand thing. So that according to our friends at the FBI, the average buyer is a father, so married man with kids that makes over $100,000 a year. So you need some wealth. But then you also need poverty because the average girl who's trafficked comes from an impoverished community. And Connecticut has both. We have some of the wealthiest zip codes and some of the poorest zip codes in America. And so it's sort of a unique confluence for those two things to come together to form a hotbed for human trafficking. But with Amirah's home and PET joining the team and the underground in Connecticut, there's this coalition of people. And we've actually, just this week, I had 2 meetings with state representatives and legislators to help pass some legislation that's going to help really make a difference here. So we're getting to do a lot of work that's changing the scene and changing the story of human trafficking in Connecticut.
Well, you're answering a lot of the questions in piecemeal, and I'm trying to keep track of what you're saying and what I'm reading. One of the questions was, does Amirah work against human trafficking on the front end to stop it before people get pulled into it? It sounds like you're a little involved in that with these legislators.
Yeah, there's a little bit of that there, and then we know it's a supply and demand issue. It's human trafficking, according to the U.S. Department of Labor, is the second largest criminal enterprise in the world and the fastest growing at $150 billion a year. So it's a real problem. And but you've got men that are demanding it, and so that you've got men that are supplying it. And that's sort of what it comes down to. So we are working with legislators to make it harder for pimps and for buyers. And I think we're going to see some pretty good results with it. But for me as a Christian, I understand that it's the brokenness of the human heart that leads to this issue. And so one of the things that we do is we partner with local churches, and I get to preach a lot, which I enjoy doing. And it's very common that when I preach at churches, I'll have men come up to either the altar after the service or come up to me with tears in their eyes, and they can't even communicate what they want to communicate. But I know it's that they've been involved with this. And so I tell pastors that all the time. You're going to have men in your church that have been involved with this. And we need to continue to preach the gospel, because only the gospel can change men's hearts, and only the gospel the love of God can overcome the lust of men. And so that's the two ways that we're really combating this issue, are continuing to partner with churches that are ministering to men, continuing to partner with places like this that are ministering to men, because the reality is it's a demand issue. It's a supply and demand issue. And so we work with legislators and we work with churches to help on the front end. But primarily what we do is we recognize that there are, a conservative estimate according to the Global Slavery Index, is that there are 500,000 women being trafficked as we speak with no real hope. And so we've got to stop the bleeding. So we've got to be a presence to help these women who are currently out there.
Thank you. Yeah, there's quite a few questions around whether or not boys are involved in being trafficked too, and are they part of the Amirah model?
That's a great question. So there are boys that are trafficked as well. And it's really tragic. And we do have some partners that work with young men. The reality is it's more than 99% women. So it does happen, but it's quite a bit more rare. And we work with people who work with them. But to be successful in aftercare, you have to sort of specialize. You can't be all things to all people. You've got to focus on a specific age group. So you've got to be someone that focuses on young girls or adult women. You've got to be an organization that focuses on young boys or adult men. You can't really minister to everybody, not in a residential model, because Amirah welcomes these women in. We give them a bed that is their own. We give them a room that's their own, and they're a part of this community. And so we specialize in the major gap in the world of anti-trafficking, and that's girls who have aged out of services for minors, so 18 to 24.
Another question, have you come across Grace Farms Foundation in New Canaan and their work to combat sex trafficking?
Yes, yeah, I had a meeting about a year ago when I first got to town with Grace Farms, and I'm just grateful for their presence. They're doing a lot in the world of law enforcement, and we're big fans of them. And Grace Community Church, which shares a property with them, is an official church partner with Amirah.
How come Connecticut is such a hot spot, and what are the underlying challenges in Connecticut that make it stand out?
Well, I mentioned one, and that is wealth and poverty. Both exist here. The other is that we are sort of right in the middle of Boston and New York. So women are often trafficked across state lines, and Connecticut sort of works for both of those, or they're on their way to one or the other. The other piece is the opioid crisis. It has hit New England harder than other areas of the country, and that plays a factor in it as well. And I think those are probably the three major things. So wealth and poverty, proximity to Boston and New York, and then the opioid crisis.
Yeah, I was just listening to a message online by Tim Keller, a conference he had with Brian Stevenson. And if anyone's familiar with Brian Stevenson, and he talked specifically about this concept of proximity, that the greatest way to deal with the socioeconomic oppression and conflicts of such is through proximity. And I would want to really put a challenge out to the NCS brothers. One of the things I enjoy so much about NCS, as some of you may know, I'm a pastor in training and pursuing a denominational post right now as a church. And it's so refreshing to come to NCS and be with a band of brothers whose most common variable isn't our denomination, but our relationship with Christ, and to share that. And for those who are perhaps new to NCS, our motto is to live pure, to right wrong, to speak truth, and to follow the King. And what an opportunity this work at Amirah gives us locally as a band of brothers across denominational lines to support the battle that we are engaged in for our King, right at our nation's capital through Amirah, and to come around this brother who's relatively new to Connecticut and about to get married on top of it, and to come around him and the work. And what a challenge it would be for NCS to have a model where a group of brothers across denominational lines take this to heart and get engaged in it in such a way that other chapters would do the same, and other houses would be started in other state capitals in other states. And I throw that out to my brothers as a challenge. And in doing so, I want to ask you personally, Michael, how can we as a group help you in this endeavor to succeed?
It's a great question. Yeah. I would say maybe three things off the top of my head. One would be sort of come alongside us in terms of just creating awareness for this reality and helping us connect to the right people. So if you're a part of a church, bring up the opportunity of having an Amirah speaker come to the church to give a gospel-centered, biblically based sermon to help in the spiritual formation of the church, understand God's heart for trafficking, or just give a presentation after the service or something like that. The more that people know these women's stories, the more hope that there is for them. And the more hope that there is that it won't happen to others. So that's one. Two, I would say if the Lord leads you to want to contribute financially, we would be incredibly grateful for that. Some of you, God will direct your heart that way, and he'll direct you to our website, and that's up to God if he wants to do that. Three would be to volunteer. So we take volunteers in the home. That's how I got to know Amirah as a male volunteer. I was one of 3 men out of about 150. And so there are just very few men who will actually volunteer in the home. There's a lot of reasons for that. I didn't know that they would take a male volunteer because of all that they had experienced, but they said, no, we need them desperately, because in the safety of the cocoon of Amirah, they need to have healthy relationships remodeled. What does it look like to have just a conversation with a man that's not transactional, but just because he cares or wants to be a friend? That won't be for everybody. Not everybody will be able to do that, but those are your options. So help us with awareness, help us with finances, because we still are in the launch phase, and then help us with volunteering if the Lord should call you. And then, of course, that all falls under the umbrella of being prayerfully involved in what we're doing. So we offer the highest level of trauma care, psychiatric care, health care physically for the women, but we know that 3 or 4 layers beneath that, there's a spiritual darkness and a spiritual force of evil at play. And so just to be committed to regularly praying for the women and their healing and their wholeness would be the greatest gift that you could give.
Thank you. Gentlemen, as you could probably guess, the actual address and specifics on the home are extremely sensitive. There's been a couple questions about that. So just be aware it's in the Hartford area, and involvement would, and you're getting clearance and so forth would be part of finding out more about that. Let's see, has the government had any issues with the Christian heart of Amirah? And I guess that's part of that question is, are you accepting any government funding?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yes and no. it's kind of funny because, as I mentioned, like it's been Homeland Security and the FBI, even more so than our own board, that has urged us to replicate our model. You know, because basically that's the reality, is there's not a whole lot you can do for the women unless there are homes, residential aftercare services like Amirah. And so in that sense, no, they're our greatest champion. But in the sense of accepting funds, yes, we often don't qualify for government funded grants because of our Christian affiliation. It's right there on our website. We're a Christian organization. And so we'll get flagged for discrimination often. So we've got major corporations that sponsor us. So I mentioned UPS, Bank of America, TD Ameritrade. Surprisingly, that usually doesn't get in the way there, and we're grateful for that. But we have almost never, we have ever, but we almost never qualify for government funding for that reason.
This question might require a lot of detail that we can't cover in this call, but the question in general, what does the trauma care you offer look like?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'll give you just a real brief overview because that is pretty involved. So I would say women have two different levels of trauma. So if they've been trafficked as an adult, it will be akin to, but worse than, the trauma that somebody might experience in wartime if they watch a friend blow up in front of them or something. It's that sort of level of trauma. But if a girl has been trafficked from the time she was a teenager, when her brain was still developing, that's what we would call complex PTSD. And that requires a little bit more. The good thing about Amirah is we have 3 full-time clinicians that work in the home, and we have clinical space in the home. And so we're offering daily expert, basically one-on-one level of trauma care to the women. And all of our clinicians are they've got an MSW, a master's in social work, or they've got a master's in clinical psychology. So it is, it's a high level. All of our clinicians are also Christians. So it's all biblically informed.
Thank you. Let's see. Bo Beatty, are you on? I'm guessing we can.
I am on. Okay. I am on.
I wondered if you could speak about what is happening from Grace to deal with this.
Thank you, David. And Michael, thank you for sharing some amazing stuff. Well, as you all can hear, this is wicked, wicked evil. And what Michael and his group is doing is remarkable. And the Holy Spirit is at work to provide restoration. So thank you. Grace Farms takes an active stance in human trafficking, and quite honestly, that's how I became aware of it. There are several organizations in the state of Connecticut, and there's a project I'm involved with called Traffic Jam Live. But there's another nationwide organization that they don't promote themselves. As Michael has probably seen, is 99% women. So are the people that are battling this. It's 99% women who are battling this. Very few men are actually involved. And that is something that I've been informed with. And there's a group in Connecticut of men gathering to make a difference in this world. And if anybody wants to learn more about that, my email is bo@gracecommunity.info, B-O. I'm happy to talk to you about it. It's an odd situation in the sense that this organization trying to get men involved in the anti-human trafficking battle, you can't really promote it because oddly, predators will join as a way to find a way to victims. So it's kind of an under the radar mechanism of screening qualified integrity-based men who want to get involved in this battle. As I said before, and Michael alluded to earlier, this is a wicked space, but amazing opportunity for the Lord to make a difference.
And thank you for being with us this morning, Michael. I hope we can, like I said, I hope we can see you more. And I hope and pray that the Lord would work in the hearts and minds of our brothers to come around you and help really usher in this very exciting opportunity for us to be really, really engaged and involved. Amen. So thank you for being with us this morning.